welcome to the Earth Feels podcast.
I'm Rose.
And I'm Christine.
Welcome to Earth Feels, the podcast for people feeling overwhelmed by the endlessly gloomy climate news.
Where every week we have soul-based conversations about climate change and explore the idea that climate change may be happening for us as much as it is happening to us.
If you are ready to shift your focus and secure the future for our kids and our grandkids, then this is the podcast for you.
And yes, we do know how to spell.
Today's topic: is there a link between misogyny and climate denial? Everything I've been reading does place a link between the patriarchy, how quote unquote civilized society treats Mother Earth, and how we look at women and how we treat women. So that's today's subject. You want to have a little conversation around that, Christine?
Yeah, let's have a big conversation around it. We might not be able to finish it all in one chat, but let's get started anyways, because there's also a link, I would say, between the way Indigenous people are treated around the world, the way women are treated, and climate change. But I think we'll make the links that we can today on that topic specifically related to Indigenous people, but that should be a standalone conversation as well. So I shared an article with you recently that was specifically looking at the link between misogyny and climate denial. And it was, what's kind of brought it to light right now is the attacks on Greta Thunberg. Apparently, I was saying it wrong.
I was too. Yes.
Apparently, that TH is pronounced Thunberg, not Thunberg. So my apologies to Ms. Thunberg. But she is being quite viciously attacked by mostly adult, older, white men, not exclusively. So what is going on there that these guys feel like they need to attack a 16-year-old young woman with Asperger's who's sailing across the ocean, who's been sitting in front of the Swedish parliament for a year now and started a movement? Why are they attacking her so viciously? And also linked to that, interestingly, in this article at least, were the attacks on Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, or AOC, let's just say that for abbreviation's sake. And she's really been subject to a lot of similar attacks where they attack the way she looks, they attack the way Greta looks, they call her creepy. Like, what is going on there? What do you think, Rose?
Well, first of all, in our country, it's become okay to talk like that. For years, that kind of thinking, speaking has been suppressed, as it should be. But in our country right now, there is a license to say anything that comes into your brain, no matter how hurtful or damaging it could be to another person. So I have to put that out there first. But there is, so reading the article that you and I had talked about, it was interesting to me because researchers in Sweden at the Chalmers, I don't know if I'm saying it correctly, Chalmers University of Technology, they launched an academic study because they wanted to find out why people are in denial about climate. There's so much in the news. There's 97%, maybe it's 99% now, of scientists have said this is real. Who are these people that are denying, and why are they denying? One of the guys in the study, his name is Martin Hultman, he coined the phrase industrial breadwinner masculinity. And I kind of like that. It's not that it exists, but I like the name of it because it really kind of talks about how these white men primarily see the separation between humans and nature. And they believe almost, maybe their belief system is that humans are obligated to use nature and its resources for whatever they want. And then now we have women, women of color in AOC's case, young women who are not supposed to have a voice. What's that old adage that my father used to say, children should be seen and not heard. Now we have voices speaking out about the degradation of the world, and it's not acceptable. This is just not acceptable. And so these, in my humble opinion, the patriarchy feels undone. Maybe they're feeling fear for the first
Threatened.
time, that their way of life is coming to an end, and it's not going to happen quickly. I mean, it's not going to happen slowly. It has been happening slowly over years, but now we've kind of reached the crescendo of the chaos. Things cannot continue. We can't continue to degrade Mother Earth like we have been. We can't continue to consume like we have been. So this whole industrial era, which has been about production, of making more stuff and feeding into capitalism, is about to go the way of the dinosaur. And I think it scares the hell out of them.
And
All in my humble opinion.
But not in a conscious way. That's what I would say for the most part. I mean, when a system fails, and system is crumbling, clearly we can't continue on the way that we are. We're in overdraft already in our for this year in our Mother Earth bank account, if you will. We've used up more resources than our allotment for the year already, and it's only September. I think the date of overdraft was on our Mother Earth bank account.
Yeah, it was sometime in July. Overshoot day or something.
Yeah.
Like that. Yeah.
So clearly, we, at some point you hit the wall, and we're very, very close to that. So.
And we know fear of change is a powerful motivation. So when you see that everything you know, everything you've been taught, everything that you've seen your father and grandfather work towards is now coming to a screeching halt.
And it's being threatened by people of color and by women who, like you say, have not traditionally had much power or much of a voice in this system. That is just the way it is. And white males feel under threat. And it's so interesting because the truth of the matter is, in terms of power, white males have such an advantage over anyone of color, over women, definitely, and for certain Indigenous people. I mean, I have this here that was from a couple of months ago, so I don't have the source, but I will look it up, where they got these worldwide annual figures. But apparently annually people killed by sharks across the world is 5, killed by lightning is 6,000 people killed every year, and women murdered by their current or ex-partner globally is 50,000, which Rose and I both went, actually, we're kind of surprised it's not more. So, in other words, living with a man is more dangerous than swimming in shark-infested waters during a lightning storm. So think about that for a second. Yeah, who is really under threat? And a lot of the violence isn't as fatal as that, but a lot of women, I mean, we can talk about the Me Too movement. What came to the surface then is that every woman, when they heard about the Me Too movement, could identify that feeling of being harassed, that feeling of being threatened, that feeling of being unsafe in public spaces and private spaces. Every single woman. I have, thank goodness, never been physically assaulted or sexually assaulted, but I knew I have been in situations where I've been harassed. I've been physically harassed. I was a young nurse pinned against a wall by a resident at midnight when I was doing my checks, and he came around, and it
Oh,
was, yeah, every single woman has had that
yes.
kind of experience. I didn't press charges. I wasn't, I got out of there, but every woman knows that we are not safe.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of women are not even safe in their homes. So the fact that white males feel threatened is so interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Well, modern capitalist patriarchy, it knows no restriction, and now they have dominated the world.
And it's the system, and it's not like your father or my husband, who are both white males, got up in the morning and decided we're going to, one day we're going to dominate the world. It's just the system. It is the way things are set up, and there's so much that is just assumed in that system. And unless you're other, because in that system, being other is not okay. And so if you're a woman, again, a person of color, an Indigenous person in particular, um, unless you have that experience, you don't know what it's like. Because if for a lot of white men in particular, the system's working just fine, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And they can't.
Well, it's in the US, it's being challenged. It's being challenged, in every institution, from the US Olympics to banking to finances to sports to everywhere. It's being challenged, right? The film industry, all these people that had a lot of power are being called out. And I think that creates a momentum as well. And so I was reading in my research, I was reading last night about ecofeminism. Do you know that term?
Yes.
Okay, so for our listeners that may not, ecofeminism is an activist movement that sees the critical connections between the domination of nature and the exploitation of women. And that came out, that whole, it's kind of like the second wave of feminism came out in the 70s. I can remember being in college when women's studies, quote unquote, were like the thing, right? You had to take a class on women's studies, but it was brand new. It had never been offered before. And it was then, back then, so I went to college in 76. God, that's so long ago. Back then, we were just starting to talk about the greening of things, right? We had glass recycling where there were bins of white, brown, and green. And that was the only kind of recycling we did, was glass.
Because there wasn't nearly as much plastic
well, there wasn't nearly as much plastic.
There is now.
Yeah. Yeah. But even paper wasn't being recycled. I mean, there was just this, it was coming into our consciousness that we perhaps needed to be thinking more about recreating from the old instead of just the throwaway culture.
Rachel Carson wrote her book, Silent Spring, in the early 60s. And so that was really the beginning of the environmental movement in the US. I mean, there was, I can't remember which river was on fire in the US in 70s. And so that's when the Environmental Protection Agency was formed. And it was under Republicans as well as Democrats, I believe under Nixon.
Yeah, you're right. As Trump has been rolling back the EPA, Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, all that kind of stuff, there's been a lot of photos that have been being shared of what the landscape looked like before the Environmental Protection Agency came into being.
So now we're into another wave, and Greta and AOC and the new Green Deal that she's talking about are kind of the figureheads of those waves. I mean, obviously there's so many people, millions of people around the world have been working on this for decades, but they happen to be right now the figureheads, and that's good. We need people like that stepping up and really having a public voice.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I also think that women, um, we are the nurturers. So and I know we've talked about this from my empathic viewpoint before, but we feel what's happening to Mother Earth. We know it in our bones, so to speak, in our core, so to speak. And we women were the first to protest environmental destruction. So it's no surprise that the man would want to silence us.
Well, it's the system that we're in. It's the patriarchal system that we've had for the last couple of thousand years that has silenced women, made them peripheral to these essential things. There is a book out there called "What Did Adam Smith's Mother Do?" or something like that. It's an excellent book because it shows Adam Smith, the father of modern economics, wouldn't have been able to do what he did unless his mother was cooking his supper, basically.
I'm just looking at this up
Mhm.
as we're talking. Adam Smith isn't the real economic hero. His mother is.
What's the name of the book?
Who cooked Adam Smith's dinner?
Who Cooked Adam Smith's Dinner? It's an excellent book. It's by an economist. Possibly she's Swedish as well. I highly recommend it because the whole idea that has been put forward for centuries is that women's work is inessential and it's not important. And I mean, that is just a thread that runs through most women's lives. Again, just like that threat of, or that feeling of being unsafe.
Mm-hmm.
And so that book does a wonderful job of debunking the fact that Adam Smith could not have done anything that he did unless his mother was cooking his dinner, and his mother and all of the servants that he had. So where am I going with this? That women have been devalued and seen as, I would go back to it, seen as other. When the male is the norm, women are seen as the other. And when somebody is seen as the other, just like people of color, Indigenous people, it's okay. You don't have to treat them as completely human. And there's all kinds of instances in history, obviously, where this plays out. But the fact that women have been half or slightly more than 50% of the human race, and we have been treated as second-class citizens and had our voices quieted, had our voices still, told that we were pea brains, if you will. And
Thank you for that.
yeah, and that it's okay to do violence to somebody who isn't who is other, and that's where the idea there is also a link to women and childbirth. We're the ones who bear children, obviously, and like Mother Earth, we're mothers. And so when that isn't valued, when motherhood isn't valued, when those skills are seen as not essential to the really important economic work of, making money, that's really what life is about, not about nurturing children, bringing up the next generation.
Oh, I can feel that in my heart.
Yeah.
Yeah, it feels so true, doesn't it?
Exactly. And so when you don't honor the mother of your children, whether it's your wife, whether it's your own mother or your daughters, how can you honor Mother Earth?
So if you extrapolate that a little bit further, there was another study that was done that how gender stereotypes affect pro-environment. So here you have all these guys who are not wanting to lose control, and then even if in the back of their mind there's kind of a niggling that, okay, this climate stuff is real and maybe I should be more involved, there was a study that showed that certain green behaviors are linked with masculine and feminine stereotypes. So so certain things like carrying a reusable bag into the grocery store, that seems feminine. So certain men are not going to do that. They'll just take their plastic bags instead
Wow.
at the checkout. But I thought it was very interesting because environmentalism is seen, well, as recently as 2016. So this is a few years ago now. Was perceived as a feminine behavior because of the caring and nurturing part of it. It's just not really masculine. So when I read that, I was like, that's really interesting because I don't see my boys like that. Now, my younger son's an environmental engineer, but they both live in California, which is probably kind of an outlier. Everybody there is more involved in what's going on with the climate, maybe because they're so connected with nature. The weather's so good, so they're out in nature all the time. My older son sent me a screenshot of a recycle poster that was at a friend's house, and he's like, evidently I'm recycling incorrectly. I'm trying to recycle stuff that can't be recycled. I'm like, oh, okay, this is my 29-year-old son who obviously is very involved.
So it's okay in California, and probably
So it's
on
okay
the
in California.
probably on the Canadian west coast or left coast, as they say in British Columbia. But
Well, and I think it might be okay in the younger generation because they are really looking at their future, whereas men in their 60s and 70s, yeah,
they're looking at losing their privileges.
Right. And as being more important than whether the world survives or not, or whether humanity can survive.
And I wouldn't,
they'll be gone.
Right. And I wouldn't say that they would frame it as losing their privileges. Having possibly having some older white males in my circle, I would say that they would say, this is the way it's always been done. It's worked really well. Why are we changing this? Why is everybody complaining? It's just get with the program, just work harder. You'll do fine. That sort of thing. It's not necessarily that they think they're dominating the earth and exterminating life in general. They would just say, Al Gore's doesn't know what he's talking about. Look at all the money he's made from his green investments. And oh my goodness, that has come up more than once in conversations and with that particular demographic in my circle. So they just discount any information that doesn't fit with their paradigm. And I have to say, we're all like that. That's how our human brain works. It's just when you are outside of the dominant paradigm, you don't have the power and the voice that traditionally white males have had in our system. You're just more aware of it from personal experience. We're all
absolutely
biased. We're just biased in different directions. And right now, our bias is towards making a livable future for our children and grandchildren.
Well, I think we're also living in a time of extreme transparency. We're seeing with the Me Too movement, but we're seeing what's going on with the Indigenous, like at Standing Rock. We saw that how these people who we have put on reservations still have no rights over the land that we've given them. Oh, well,
we didn't give it to them.
Well, right. Okay. Over the land that we
forced them on.
Assigned to them. Right.
Yes. From their traditional land.
Yeah, no. And similarly in the Amazon, the same thing. When the land becomes more valuable, profit becomes more valuable than human life. And that's the domination over.
I mean, that thread goes right back through Western civilization, European civilization coming here, and what was done to the indigenous population at the time for the gold and for the land. And
I'm hopeful that there is kind of, in Joanna Macy's terminology, there's kind of a turning, because the false separation that we have assumed between nature and humanity, we're finding that that's not true, right? We're discounting that false separation. And who can we look to for the truth? And the indigenous people have carried that truth with them. Their connection to the earth is they had to they were migrant, they moved with the seasons for food. They have a connection to the earth that we need to be able to tap into.
Well, and I would say we all originally, if you go back far enough, had that connection to the earth, but we have been, in quotation marks, civilized. I use civilized in quotation marks because I don't think we've been civilized at all. And as Gandhi said, when he asked what he thought about Western civilization, he said it would be a good idea. And so so this thread goes throughout our history, though, and it's time for the great turning, to use Joanna Macy's terminology, and that'll be an interesting topic. Let's talk about Joanna Macy's work in one of our sessions as well.
Brilliant, visionary.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk some good news. This has been a good conversation, a good beginning conversation. I think we could go for hours on this.
Yeah, we'll probably revisit it. I hope we will.
Yeah, and the purpose of this podcast, for those of you who are listening, is to get the conversation started. We can't solve a problem if we're not talking about it. And I think I quoted in another podcast, 59% of people never talk to their friends and family about climate catastrophe, climate crisis. And so that's what we're here to do. And just to prompt you, just to get you to talk about one thing with somebody. You don't know the ripples you'll create. Anyway, good news. Last week we talked about Ethiopia planting I don't know how many trees in 24 hours. And this week there have been two other countries that have stepped up, New Zealand and Ireland. So proud of my Irish heritage. So both of them have said that they will be planting inordinate amounts of trees. We can put a link into so you can read those articles. And the other good news was what? About Maine. Why don't you share that?
Maine has banned styrofoam packaging. They became the first state in the US to ban styrofoam packaging. That's not that far from where you are in Massachusetts, is it? How far is Maine?
No, my best friend actually lives in Maine, about 4 hours.
Okay, so that's something to celebrate.
Yeah.
And do we have an action tip?
An action tip, I would say, take a look at how the patriarchy affects you on a daily basis. Can you see it?
Whether you're a man or a woman or a person of color.
Yeah, can you see, as a man, can you see your privilege? And as a woman, can you see where your voice might have been suppressed?
In small or big ways.
Exactly.
Okay, that's a fair bit to chew on. And so our sanity tip for today, well, to save my sanity, I hope it saves my sanity. We'll see what the weather's like. I'm heading off tomorrow for our final canoe trip in the wilderness. We live right on, it's called the Gateway to Woodland Caribou Park, the community I'm in Northern Ontario. And it was just last year named UNESCO World Heritage Site for both the natural heritage and the history of the Indigenous people in the area. So
wow, I had no idea that you lived that close to the Indigenous. I know you've mentioned some friends of yours that are Indigenous, but I didn't know that you were really up against their territory.
Well, so the thing is, there are First Nations communities around, but my community is, there's very much an Indigenous presence in this community and has been for years. It was only settled, gold was found here in the 1920s, and the Europeans only came in the 30s. So if you think about that, there are people still living in this community, Indigenous people who remember what it was like before the white men came. Not a lot. So it's a very interesting community. It's very interesting energy. So yes, I live, I have good friends who live beside me who are Indigenous, and it's Not to say there aren't issues sometimes with racism in this community, but sometime we can talk about that with, I'll bring some of my Indigenous friends in this community to talk about their experience if you like. But anyways, yeah, but I'm on the edge of the wilderness. And so the heritage that UNESCO recognized was the fact that this has been, the waterways have been used since time before memory by the Indigenous people. So that's going to save my sanity. I feel like I've been doing a lot of work on this podcast, and so I'm not going to be doing that in the next 7 days. What's your sanity tip for those listeners? I would say just I know we've said unplug. I know we said go out in nature. I just want to say that again, like truly unplug if you can for 24 hours, for 48 hours, and deliberately spend time connecting with nature, however you can do that where you are. Not all of you are lucky enough to live right beside a UNESCO World Heritage Site, but you live beside somewhere where there's rocks and trees and lakes and
well, unless you live in New York City.
Well, there's green. Hey, Central Park is how big? That's an amazing green space.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. I would say spend some time in silence. Just out in nature. Put your back up against a tree or a rock and just sit there and feel the air on your skin. Feel.
Nice.
That's this week's episode of Earth Feels. Special thanks to singer-songwriter Kristen Hoffman for generously allowing us to use Song for the Ocean. Thanks for listening.
Don't forget, subscribe to our podcast on iTunes or Google Play so you don't miss an episode. Catch you next time.
Bye-bye.
Children of the earth, I'm calling out. There's a mission for you and for me. You see, your mother, she has been suffering, and the truth is told beneath